December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the 12th of December, 2016. You are listening. 7th of December. 7/12/12/7. You're listening to the Sackheads radio show. I was close. Leave me alone.
All right, how much would you like?
How much what?
You said leave me alone. How much would you like?
How much do you have on you? I think
Not
that's kind of
a
the more
lot.
important question to be asked, don't you? This is, of course, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, the vicious attack by the Japanese Empire on our citizens and sailors and airmen and everybody else that was in Pearl Harbor on that day. And it was the act that thrust the Americans into World War II. just still to this day, the amount of emotion I think that comes when you think about it is pretty incredible. The amount of lives lost, the fact that, it kind of took that event to wake the country up. And we can talk about a lot of it leading up to it. But I definitely want to share, have Clint share, because he has direct contact to the Pearl Harbor attacks. And by the way, we are streaming on YouTube this evening, so if you want to check that out, it's on our page. But Clint, I know that this is something that you hold near and dear to your heart, and you tell with pride and honor for your family, and for a nation. So I definitely want to have you share your memories and your family's involvement.
I will, but first I want to acknowledge White Mamba in chat, who says that the 12th of December 2016 is a day that will live in SHR infamy. So,
Okay, so there goes all the solemnity that you just spent.
I'm sorry, I read that and I love it so much, and I can't. I can't let that slide. I'm sorry,
Man,
I'm sorry. Look,
you build one house, it doesn't make you a carpenter. You mess up one date.
I don't think that's how the saying goes.
Okay.
You want to?
No. I don't want to.
You know what?
Let's just stick with what you're going to go with.
So, as most of our listeners know, my family is from Hawaii, and on both sides, my mom and my dad's side, and my dad's dad, my grandfather, was a Pearl Harbor survivor. Mm-hmm. He was at Hickam during the attack. Actually, got his unit got underway. He was Army, so that's why he was on the ground. And I remember, growing up and spending time over there, and so forth. I was here from the mainland, but I'd go over and I'd spend summers with my grandparents over there, and the family came. I'm first generation born over here on the mainland, but I go back every chance I get. But I remember growing up and my grandfather, particularly, who was there that day, he didn't talk too much about it. But he'd tell a little bit about it, how he was just kind of getting out of his bunk when all of a sudden they heard the some of the first explosion. I think the first bomb landed on Ford Island, which is kind of in the middle, and really it's become kind of the symbol for the Pearl Harbor attack. The tower that's there. It's still there today when you go to the visitor center. And my grandmother, his wife, was a radio operator at Bellows Field, which was another base on another part of the island that was also attacked. It was more than just Pearl Harbor and that region of bases that were attacked. I mean, there was a casualty at Fort Kamehameha, which had which was an anti-aircraft battery kind of protecting the harbor, and some of the other locations throughout the island. And if we have time, I might get to that here in a little bit, but so she was a radio operator at Bellows Field. Bellows Field was also attacked. I remember stories. My mom's mom and dad were actually going into church, and as they were walking into the church in Kaneohe, they could see the Japanese aircraft flying over. And my grandmother remembers very vividly looking up and having one of the pilots look down she called them Gomer goggles, with their little Gomer goggles, and she said, I swear he was like staring right at me, and they were like smiling as they flew over towards the attack. So I've been to Pearl Harbor several times. There's obviously, everybody knows the Arizona Memorial that's there. The USS Missouri is also there, moored behind the Arizona. The Arizona, obviously, the symbol for the beginning of the war. Yep. The Missouri, where the Japanese surrender was signed in Tokyo Bay. So you have the symbol of the beginning of the war, the symbol for the end of the war. They're moored right next to each other on Battleship Row. But there's also another memorial in Pearl, and you have to be military or be with military to go see. And that's another, that's the Utah, which is still there as well, and it's a memorial, and I had the opportunity to visit that as well. But even just going there today, there's just a solemn feeling, and I remember going there as a kid and just feeling how heavy everything was, and feeling this connection because of my grandfather's stories and my grandparents' stories about being there, and kind of some of the things that he experienced that day, and without getting too much into it, and some of the actions that he took that morning, and he was also in Guadalcanal later on in the war, but just the feeling I had there, even from very young, it's a little bit different going back there today, and it's a little sad. I mean, I'm 40 years old, and I think in the 30 years going there, I don't know if it's we've lost something, or maybe the younger people that go there now don't have as much of a connection. It's maybe not as solemn as I remember it. Mm-hmm. It's still a solemn place, don't get me wrong.
But the connection's not the same.
It's not the same.
And I just want to share, Jennifer's in our chat room, and she said that she has this almost exact same connection to Pearl Harbor, and that it sounds like your grandparents were there together.
Okay.
So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing, and I don't know if she's been back there either. I've had the opportunity to stay at Bellows Field. Bellows is kind of a recreation base now that military and family members of military can stay at. But I had the opportunity to stay there with some folks, and there's an old runway. Bellows Field there was an air pursuit squadron that was stationed there, and my grandparents actually lived there for a period of time. But the old runways are still out there, and there was a flight of B-17s that had come in and kind of showed up in the middle of this attack. They were en route to the Philippines.
Right, and they were completely unarmed.
Completely unarmed to save weight. And so they arrive in the middle of a war, holy cow, and they've got American anti-aircraft shooting at them. They've got Japanese shooting at them. Most of them were able to land safely, but one actually bellied in it at Bellows. And the scrape marks
Nobody has one in the pipe.
Right. Nobody.
It's like walking around with an empty gun.
And to this day, there are still scrape marks on the runway where that B-17 bellied in. They never fixed it. If you go out to Hickam today or to Pearl today, Ford Island, they left the bullet holes in the sides of the buildings, in some of the hangars, and some of the concrete that's been chipped off from the strafing. They left all that. That's still there. So if you're fortunate to be able to go out on base and you go and you just see, 75 years later,
it's all still there.
And that's important to see. That's incredibly important to
absolutely.
see.
It absolutely is. But I don't think most people understand that stuff is still there as a reminder. And I'm trying to get off on a tangent here, and I do want to focus back on the attack. But
that's what we're here for, man.
Did anybody see the president's speech today from Pearl Harbor for the 75th anniversary?
I absolutely must have missed it. I was really busy, but you know me, I'm all over the media like crazy.
BZ, did you see it?
So BZ?
Did you see the president's 75th anniversary Pearl Harbor speech from Pearl Harbor?
I can sum it up in two letters, CA, and that stands for conspicuously absent.
How come nobody's upset about this other than me? Am I the only?
I guess it's better than my acronym, which is DMF. First word's dumb. You figure out the rest.
No, but that's an excellent point. Here's a sitting president. There will only be one 75-year anniversary.
Yes.
Of Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
This is it, and that sitting president is nowhere to be seen.
And you know what? Trump could have had an opportunity to, and I don't want to politicize this, but this is kind of an important event. I would have loved for Trump to kind of pick up the baton on this and give a speech. And I understand this would have to be planned out ahead of time, or whatever, but in my opinion, the President of the United States should have either been on the USS Missouri or at the USS Arizona Memorial, which I believe is it still commissioned? I know it's a graveyard, but I believe, is the Arizona still commissioned?
Yes.
So I wanted to see him there giving this
another
speech.
Incredibly important reason why he should have been there. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 200 living Pearl Harbor survivors.
Yes.
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 Period.
Only
Yes.
200.
That's another reason that he should have been there. Many of them are saying this is the last time you'll ever see any actual Pearl Harbor survivors attend any ceremony in Pearl on December 7th.
And my grandfather used to go to some of those. He passed away in 1999, but he kept in contact with some folks, and he used to go, obviously from being from the islands and so forth. But it saddens me that our president was not there.
Yes.
But it says absolutely all you need to know about him.
It does, but this will never happen again. I mean, the next major event for Pearl Harbor will be 25 years from now at the 100th anniversary.
Well, and more importantly, listen, for a guy who's had so many issues in his presidency, right? So many just questions about his love for country that's been sustained throughout the entire 8 years. This would have been a great way to silence some of that. By showing up and making a great speech. And, you know, we know this guy is all about legacy. There's no doubt about it. This was his chance to actually maybe gain a little bit of respect back from a lot of people, and he couldn't do it.
I think frankly, he couldn't give a shite less.
He can't. And but I want to I don't want to take away from the memory of Pearl Harbor with this. It was just kind of an observation I made, and I knew I was going to take us off on a tangent.
No, I think it's an important. I think
it's
it's an important
very
observation.
important
It is, but I kind of wanted to walk through the attack here because I don't think students study the Battle of Pearl Harbor.
I would agree.
At all, or what was important. I mean, they may study what led up to it. The Japanese declared war on China in 1937. By the way, China, how's about a freaking thank you? Anyways, kind of bailed them out. But at 3:42 a.m., the minesweeper USS Condor was patrolling less than 2 miles from the entrance of Pearl Harbor, and they see something ahead off the port bow. And one of the sailors sees it as a periscope. It's a periscope. Not supposed to be any submarines in the area. The Condor sends a message via the light system to the USS Ward that they sighted a submarine on a westerly course. That the speed was approximately 9 knots. So 3:42 a.m. At 6:10, the Japanese aircraft carriers are kind of in some choppy seas. The crewmen are kind of getting ready to go, and the carriers turn into the wind, getting ready for takeoff for the first wave of airplanes. About 183 fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes total. 6:45 in the morning, the USS destroyer Ward found the submarine, and they move in to engage the submarine. There's shots fired. I believe they fired 2 shots. The second shot hit the submarine at the waterline. The commander of the Ward believes he sees the submarine roll over and start to sink. Now, that was never confirmed during the captain. I think his name was Outerbridge. It was never confirmed. They never found the sub until, what was it? Like maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago.
Yes, it had been gone for all that time.
Yeah, it had been, and they found this submarine with a hole right through where the skipper said that they where they said they had hit just below the waterline. I believe it was right around the area of the conning tower at that waterline. So it has been confirmed now, but it had never been confirmed up until that point.
That's
no
crazy.
debris or anything like that. So the USS Ward fired the first shots of the war. They did drop depth charges as well, but I think the 2 shots were fired from the deck gun. And at 6:45 a.m., we actually struck first blood, not the Japanese.
That's amazing.
Most people don't know that.
That is absolutely true.
I don't think I've ever heard that story, to be honest with you.
So 6:53 a.m., the Ward radios in to Naval Station Pearl Harbor and says, "Hey, we've dropped depth charges upon a submarine which is operating in our defensive sea area." They then send another message, quote, "We have attacked, fired upon, and dropped depth charges upon submarine operating in defensive sea area." He believes that the message will kind of alert people that something bad is happening.
As it should have.
As it should have. Now let's forward up to 7:02 a.m. there's a mobile radar station. Radar is kind of brand new, and it's one of 6 radar stations on Oahu, the Opana Mobile Radar. It's obviously new in the islands. One of them sees on the screen, I believe they were supposed to shut off at 7 a.m., but one of them sees a formation of what they believe to be 50 or more aircraft coming in onto Oahu. The privates call Fort Shafter, which is kind of the hub of where the radar network is coming in, and says, "Hey, there's a large plane or a large flight coming in." 7:15 a.m. The ward had sent out its message about the attacking the submarine. The message makes its way eventually to Admiral Kimmer, who was the commander of the Pacific Fleet there. But there had been so many false reports of submarines in the days and couple weeks leading up to this event that Admiral Kimmel decides to do nothing to wait for verification of the report,
Right.
quote unquote. So it's like there's all these little mistakes
That lead into it.
that are leading into it, and there had been no formal declaration of war for Japan. So Japan was supposed to deliver the formal declaration of war prior to or right about the same time as the start of the attack. They had their ambassadors timing this to meet with the American ambassador. They failed to type the message up in a timely manner. And therefore, that's why the Japanese delegation was disgraced, because they attacked prior to having their declaration of war delivered to the United States. Kind of another side note on history that a lot of folks don't know.
Yes, and the commander of that airbase also put all of his planes in a central location.
They did, yeah. They were more worried about sabotage because
Yes.
of the Japanese population on the islands than they were about air raid or attack, that they had the planes kind of wingtip to wingtip to make it easier to protect them on the ground. And it actually made for excellent fodder for the Japanese attacks. I mean, one bomb would destroy numerous
much
aircraft.
damage.
Yeah. So 7:20 a.m., the radar operator reports the biggest sightings on the radar that he'd ever seen. The planes are about 70 miles away, and the lieutenant who was on duty at the time believes it's that flight of B-17s coming in, and he can't tell that his radar operator that the B-17s are inbound from the mainland for security reasons. So all he says is, "Well, don't worry about it."
Again, another oversight, another assumption.
Yeah. 7:40 a.m. The Japanese pilots report seeing the long line of coast, which is the Kakuku Point on Oahu. 7:49 a.m. The Japanese arrive, and they see that there's no aircraft carriers in port. They wanted to destroy the United States aircraft carriers because that was going to be kind of really the crushing blow that they needed. At this time, battleships were no longer really the mainstay of the Navy. They were aging. They weren't they were good targets for the Japanese, don't get me wrong, but they weren't really the future of naval warfare.
We were shifting into a new paradigm.
We were, but at this time that hadn't been proven in war. That was just theory, right? So really, Admiral Yamamoto was the first one to really use carriers successfully and forced us into this new paradigm. But the United States was kind of understood the advantages of aircraft carriers, was kind of having this transition. As it turns out, fortunately, they weren't there, and at 7:55 a.m., the air raid begins. At approximately 8 a.m., the B-17s come in. So they kind of come in right about the same time. So I guess that lieutenant was partially right and partially wrong. There were 2 waves to the attack. There was going to be a third, but they wanted to attack the fuel reserves at Pearl Harbor in order to keep the U.S. Navy out of action for several weeks. But the Japanese admirals decided against it because they believed they had achieved their objective.
A major failure on their part.
Major failure on their part, as it turns out. But again, good news that that the aircraft carriers weren't there. But some of the other bases that were attacked was the Naval Air Station at Kaneohe Bay. Was attacked. A lot of people don't understand that one or really kind of know what else was hit. We talked about Bellows Field, which is where there were some 12 P-40s were located. We talked about Ford Island. We talked about Hickam Field. We talked about Wheeler Field. There was the Marine Corps Air Station at Ava, or Ewa, as some people pronounce it, EWA, that was also attacked that day. And there was another base that was really key to this attack, and that was the Haleiwa Field. And Haleiwa Field was the home to the 47th Pursuit Squadron at the time. Mm-hmm. Several of the pilots had spent the night on Ford Island, and so when the attack began, they began racing back to their base in order to try and make a difference. Or, excuse me, they stayed at Wheeler Field the night before the attack. The Japanese did strafe Wheeler Field, and when they strafed Wheeler Field, that's when 5 of the pilots from the 47th drove by car to their air station. Second Lieutenant George Welk and Second Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor were 2 pilots. They had their P-40s fueled, armed, and ready to go by the time they arrived. They ignored their pre-takeoff checklists and were the first to take off and defend Oahu. Lieutenant Welch was credited with taking down 4 Japanese aircraft. Lieutenant Taylor was credited with taking down 2 Japanese aircraft, and both were ultimately considered to be the first aces of World War II, and for their efforts they were awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Wow. So 2 American heroes actually got off the ground and engaged the enemy and made it down safely. They landed at Wheeler Field after being shot at by anti-aircraft guns as well.
That's crazy.
So, a lot going on. The Battle of Pearl Harbor, I know we're up against a break, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but...
No, you know what?
75th anniversary, I figured we'd kind of walk through it a little bit without getting, too much into the first and second waves, but just kind of understanding there were more facilities that were attacked than just the Navy yards and the harbor itself.
Right.
I mean, this was not solely a naval engagement. This was a naval and an army engagement and a marine engagement. This was all of the services involved. 21 ships of the Pacific Fleet were sunk or damaged, including all of our battleships. On a side note, the USS California was there, and there's a monument at the California State Capitol that is so overlooked, and it's kind of off to the side, but the ship's bell from the USS California is in Capitol Park at the California State Capitol.
That I knew.
And it's literally just like a granite arch with the ship's bell on it. And there's not a lot of pomp or circumstance to it, but... even in our home state of California, just to have that piece of history here,
it's enormous,
and it's frustrating how overlooked that monument is. But again, I don't know if it goes to that. We're 75 years away. We've kind of lost this connection. There was a naval vessel that was able to get underway, the USS Nevada.
Right.
It was hit. The captain got it underway, and as it was underway and taking damage, he realized that he had a good opportunity of being sunk, and if his ship had been sunk in the middle of the harbor, it would have bottled up the whole harbor.
Well, and that very narrow space, he wanted to make sure that it didn't stop and block the entire entrance.
Yeah, if he'd have gone down, it would have blocked it, and the whole fleet would have been not able to get out. So he actually went out and run his ship aground intentionally. Beached it intentionally. So many individual acts of heroism. I can't possibly name them all, but to the men and women of our armed forces, I thank you sincerely from the bottom of my heart for your service. To any of our survivors or family members of survivors from the Battle of Pearl Harbor, I want to thank you. My heart goes back to all of you today, particularly if you lost any loved ones in the battle. We thank them for their sacrifice, and we thank you as well. Just to name the ships who were sunk or damaged for the battleships, we had the Arizona, the California, Maryland, Nevada, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and West Virginia. for our light cruisers. We had the Helena, the Honolulu,
Yep.
the Raleigh. Our destroyers were the Cassin and Downs, which were in dry dock that day, both of them. The Helm and the Shaw, the seaplane tender Curtis. The Utah, which was it was a target ship. It was a former battleship, but that's the one that still had 50 some odd men were died
Yeah.
and are still in there.
Still entombed.
Yep, still entombed. That one is still there, not available for the public to visit. The USS Vestal repair ship was hit. The Oglala, the mine layer, the tug Stoyomo, and floating dry dock number 2. Was also destroyed, and that's not in addition, obviously, to the folks who gave their lives that day, as well as our aircraft that was destroyed.
It was truly an amazing day, and that's not obviously the only connection you have to World War II. I as well. Both my grandfathers fought in World War II. One in the Pacific, one in the Atlantic. Both in the Navy. I think just about everyone in this country, in some way, shape, or form, has contacts to World War II. It is amazing to see what that event triggered in this country for so long. The amount of not just outrage, obviously there was outrage, but the amount of patriotism, the amount of people who were lining up before the draft was completely enacted.
You were reviled if you went into either the European or Pacific theater and you were a draftee.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there were so few that were. They couldn't keep up with them lining up. That was the amazing part of that. They couldn't keep up with the amount of people that were trying to get in. More than the draft would draw. They were drawing more people to sign up voluntarily than the draft would have actually drawn per the lottery system. And then the people at home here, those that couldn't fight for one reason or another, you think of Rosie the Riveters and all the people back home that sacrificed in order to support those efforts overseas and give them the equipment that they needed to fight the fight.
I still have food coupons
Yeah,
that my mother had.
that's amazing. So many different things.
Gas coupons.
People just dragging spare steel and metal down to factories to
Yes,
get
they had
melted down.
Metal drives.
Yeah. The kids, the young kids would be running around looking for scraps metals to turn in. And it wasn't just a specific incident. It was the entire country.
But here's the sad thing. We could never duplicate that today because our ability to produce is so reduced.
Well, and when we come back, maybe we'll talk about that, how that may change a little bit. We are going to take a break here on the Sackheads Radio Show, live in the SHR Media Network. I'm going to refresh the feed just because I want to make sure that it's not interrupted while we're live. And not that I'm seeing anything, but last week we had the issue, and I don't want to run down that. So if you're listening, you'll have to hit the refresh button.